Hello, my name is Willam Rhodes. I'm an artist and the creator of the San Francisco African American Senior Narrative Quilt Project. 2020 and 2021 have been a very difficult year for many people, and I feel really blessed and fortunate that I've been able to continue this project. This year, I've been able to not only record the images and the stories of San Francisco African American seniors, but I've been able to collaborate with two amazing artists. The first artist is Michael Ross. He's a mixed media artist, and he contributed some of the sewing and added drawings to several of the quilts. And the second artist that I collaborated with is the revolutionary, iconic artist, Emory Douglas.
Well, my name is Emory Douglas. I'm basically a self-taught artist. I did go to take basic training. I went to City College in San Francisco, which is like a junior college, and took up commercial art, able to develop my skills to do pre-press production for like magazines and different publication, newspapers and all those kinds of things, putting them together so that when people see it, they can read it and all those kinds of things. Pre-press work. And then in conjunction with that, I was able to use that when I got into the Black Panther Party. As an artist, I was able to use that skill and designing the layout for the Black Panther Party newspaper, which basically is where 99% of the artwork that I did during that period was initially published in the Black Panther newspaper, front, back, and sometimes in the interior of the paper itself. Well, a young artist is to be inspired by what you're doing, enjoy it, but it's just something social justice issue. You can have fun doing it, but don't do it just because it's the fun thing to do. And have some understanding, basic understanding of the issue that you choose to discuss or talk about or project in your art as an artist. Because the fact that someone may ask you, what is it? And you have to be able to explain it. Or someone may have a disagreement with what it is that you're doing, and you still have to be able to explain your perspective on the art that you're doing. So you have to be basically informed about the issue that you are integrating, reflected in your art. Black music that you heard during that time, you heard Temptations, you heard, but when I talk about music, I'm talking in two contexts. As a youngster just coming up, you're seeing the rock and roll, which rock and roll was the black music, with Chuck Berry and many others during that time. Then you had James Brown, you had Martha and the Vandellas, Frankie Lyman, and you had Curtis Mayfield in the Impressions. You had Aretha Franklin. You had all those. Then you had the Motown sound coming out, all that, and the Philadelphia sound out of Philadelphia, the black music out of Philadelphia. All that was music that was listened to. But when the movement and beginning the protest movement you can talk about some of the things that the Marvin Gaye did. You had to talk about the group called War, who did a lot. So you had a lot of musicians during that time was making contributions to social concerns and issues. The staple singers, all of those were doing. And some of their music, not necessarily all of it, some of it always reflected social concerns.
Emory Douglas was the Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party from 1967 through 1980, and his iconic images are going to be used in the center medallions of several of the quilts. Now, all of the quilts will be exhibited at the African American Art and Culture Complex. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support.
Douglas, just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've done.
Well, I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1943, came to California early 1951. Lived in the what's now called Western Addition, or it was then called Fillmore, and was raised up between Fillmore and sometimes with my auntie and Hunters Point, and so between the two, most of those years, most of my time living in San Francisco. I went to school in San Francisco. I went to Roosevelt, great junior high, Benjamin Franklin, and I was in the Polytechnic High for a while when it was open, and then I got my GED when I was in and out of the Youth Authority during that particular time as well. So I was, as a youngster, like many others, just did play around with artwork. Nothing had no social meaning to it other than just copying cartoons or drawing on newspaper, paper bags, whatever you could find. Just doing abstract images, nothing related to anything other than what I was trying to duplicate what I seen, or trying to interpret what I seen in the artwork or in the photographs. Going fast forward, during that time, the civil rights movement was taking place. Even in the 50s, civil rights was a continuation from the 50s to the 60s. But I remember as a kid in Fillmore, about 1955, around that time, I think I was about the 7th or 8th grade during that time at Benjamin Franklin. And you had young blacks my age didn't have to wear our dog tags with our name and age on them. If we were caught out after curfew, there was a curfew, and if you were caught out after curfew, they could take you to juvenile. And so that was for about, I believe, for about a year or so in that community. And I remember later on reading it in the late 60s that it was outraged because that was still on the books in San Francisco. So, there was profiling, as you have today, of blacks, young blacks. Then, same thing back then, there's youngsters standing on the corners, older guys than I, cutting it up, talking, and what have you. Police come by. If they could stop them before they could move on, they would stop them, frisk them if they had any money on them or they didn't have the ID. They bust them for vagrancy, all these kinds of things. And it was a consistent routine that took place during that time, and what have you. Then you had the civil rights movement, and during that time, particularly during the late going into the late 50s, going into the 60s, when blacks could not perform. They could perform at the Film Auditorium, but they couldn't stay at the hotels downtown. They weren't performing in none of the venues that took place, except the Fairmont Hotel was the only one where blacks did perform at during that. I think Carmen McRae was a mainstay of entertainers during that time, who was there often quite a bit during the 60s. And blacks who used to see all the entertainers coming up and down Fillmore Street, because they had to either live in Fillmore or they had families and stuff that they knew when they were coming to performing at the Fillmore Auditorium. And then it was run by a black man named Sullivan, who in the Fillmore used to consider him as the mayor of San Francisco during that time. And that was the name he was given for Fillmore, the mayor, and everybody knew who he was. And so Sullivan, matter of fact, Bill Graham used to work for him. And so I think it was Bill Graham gave him an opportunity to do some shows, some performances when things was going kind of slow. And that's how the Bill Graham thing came about, was through Sullivan, because Sullivan was the one who was running it, and Bill Graham worked for Sullivan. But then there was a hotel that used to be between Fillmore and Webster on O'Farrell Street, where you had all the black entertainers who would come to town. Most of them would stay there. 85% of them would stay at that hotel. and you would see them coming up and down Fillmore Street, going to the black radio DJ's record shop to do live interviews during that time as well. So you could see Bobby Blue Bland, all the blues, jazz singers, whoever came there, and whoever came in and was going to do an interview, you would see them coming up and down Fillmore in that area, walking to the record shops and what have you. Yeah, and going fast forward, then you're going to early '60s, civil rights movement, San Francisco. Blacks couldn't even work at car dealers, ships, and none of those things. So there were major protests. The free speech movement was taking place. A lot of sit-ins in San Francisco that took place were on the news. I recall it had a TV, late '50s, had about 3 stations. And I remember in 1959, down that time, we used to look at the baseball games from Cuba, where you would, at nighttime you had the Latin players and the black players, all of them playing from around Latin America and even from the States during that time, because the gangsters then controlled Cuba. And so what happened is you had the Follies on the weekend. After that, that was the only thing that was on after midnight. On TV it was like going to Reno and looking at all the performances and the dances and the nightlife. You would see that on the TV every weekend up until 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. That was basically what you could get on during that time. And it just so happens I didn't know what it was. I'm not. It just so happens it cut off one time, and I remember the newsman speaking about something, but I didn't know what it was. I wasn't familiar with what it was, but coming to find out that was the beginning of the Cuban Revolution that was taking place during that time. And so then you had the Civil Rights Movement, and you had sometimes on the TV, you would see international news. You would see the dogs being sicked on the marchers and the protesters in South Africa. You would see the tanks and the beat downs, the water hosing. Then you see the same thing on the local news that was happening in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. So these things began to form my awareness of what was going on. Emmett Till, murder of Emmett Till, all those things. Seeing it, Fannie Lou Hamer, when she in the black delegation, the first delegation in I believe went to the Democratic Convention, and was in mid 50s, mid 60s, excuse me, and they were refused to allow this delegation from Mississippi that represented Mississippi, which was predominantly all black. They refused to allow them to be seated at the Democratic Convention, and I remember that. In those things, and then seeing 4 years later at the next convention when they went back, the delegation was a little diverse, but then there had been a lot of push through civil rights and what have you, and they were allowed to be seated as the delegation from Mississippi. As fast forward during this time, 63, 64, 65, I went to City College of San Francisco. It was suggested that I take up art. And when I went there, I talked to the counselor, they suggested I take up commercial art, advertising art. And so that kind of dealt with the disciplines of dealing with pre-press production of publications and what have you. So I developed through that, I developed my skills to the point where they used to send me out on job assignments, worked in many various places, developing my skills. And beginning to become aware of how you put publications and different things together. And during that time, the Black Conscious Movement became very intense because of the murders that had been taking place during the rebellions and riots, and always causing the rebellions and riots. And they were always being justified, no different than today. And so I wanted to do something. When I got to City College of San Francisco, I got involved there. There was a brother named Roland Young, who was a local DJ in San Francisco on the radio, but he also was at City College. at the time, going and taking up some classes, whatever. But he was the one. He was the one who was organizing during that time to change the Negro Student Union to the Black Student Union. And this is about the same time that San Francisco State City College was beginning to push for the Black ethnic studies or Black student unions. And it became, I believe, the first or second organized Black student union in the country was at San Francisco State. But this is around that same time that at City College of San Francisco that I got involved with the Rolling Young and those who wanted me to do the flyers and posters because they had the Black Arts Movement was going on during this time. I had got involved with the Black Arts Movement while I was at City College through via Marvin X and others who were doing a lot of political plays and social justice plays, cultural plays, and wanted me to do the flyers and material for some of the announcements for their venues. And so while so doing all these things, I became more and more aware of what was going on and became more enlightened. I remember Emory Baraka when he came to, I think it was 1966, 1967. It could have been a bit before that because he came and he left and he came back again. But when he initially came, he was out at San Francisco State and doing community theater via Marvin X and others. And he asked me in general to do some very simple backcrops for the stage plays that he was putting on. So I did those, contributed in that way in the Black Arts Movement. There were people I knew in the Black Arts Movement who were involved with other organizations during that time. And there were one organization at that time who had brought a lot of different people together. And I was asked to come to the meeting because one of the brothers who I were working with, who I came together with during that time, because we were frustrated and trying to figure out what we could do, brothers and sisters, and they knew and they were highly active. So they had been going to the meetings and they knew of my work in the Black Arts Movement. So one of them asked me if I would come to that meeting because they were looking for someone to do the poster for that event. I agreed. I went to the meeting and they were planning to bring Malcolm X widow to the Bay Area, Sister Betty Shabazz, to honor her. And they wanted me to do the poster for that event. And I agreed to do the poster. And they said a couple of weeks later, some brothers would be coming over and they would agree if they would do the security for that event. This is coming early 1967. And when they came over to the meeting and agreed to do the security, that was Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. They were unknown at that time. Nobody knew outside of Oakland and those intellectual and activists who knew them in Oakland or had engaged with them, but no notoriety outside of that. And so it was after they came and agreed to do the security, after the meeting, I asked them how I could join because I knew that's what I wanted to be a part of. And Huey and Bobby had business cards and they gave me their cards. And I would contact Huey and arrange to come over to his house because I didn't have a car. He just catch the bus and hang out. He'd show me around the neighborhood. We'd go by Bobby's house. That was my transitioning into the Black Panther Party in the context of the work that I had began to do that people became well aware of today.
That is excellent. So really thinking about your work, how do you think your work specifically affected the community?
Well, I think it affects the community because I think it had an impact because it was a reflection of what the concerns were. It was expressing their feelings. It was an art. It was a language, an art language, a language of communicating in the context of what the community itself could feel, could relate to, identify with. And so, because it was not a me art, but it was we art. It was art about social justice issues of the time. Police murders, which was point number 7 of the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party. We want to immediately end police brutality and murder of Black people in this country. And so that's why the urgency of that at that time was why we began to start organizing around that point number 10 point number 7 during at that time. It was and so it was thereafter that we began to develop the social programs, all that other programs that you also seen in the art. But the art was about that. It was about solidarity with people's struggles around the world. So it had a great broad interconnecting and intersection with all these people, human quality concerns around the world about quality of life issues. So the art on a grassroots level, in the beginning, was the caricatures of the cartoons of the pig drawings. Those had a great impact because they transcended the Black Panther Party, the African American community, and became a universal symbol of an image that showed that represented those who were victimizing the community in many ways. And so that symbol itself took on a life of its own and became a universal symbol in that sense. So I think that we were able to capture the attention and the imagination through the artwork of the people. We were reflecting in the artwork and interpreting the artwork the feelings of the people through the perspective, the ideological and philosophical perspective of the organization that I was a part of, the Black Panther Party, at that time. I was honored and delighted that you asked me to do the collaboration. I have, from a distance and from up close, has seen that you were involved in a lot of community work and had became familiar with you and what your work was about. And so when you asked me, I was happy to do the collaboration, and also was delighted to let you make the decision on the 2 images that you chose to use. And the 2 images that you chose to use were 2 of the most popular ones of that period. The one with the lady with the spear, and it says Afro-American solidarity with the oppressed people of the world. That was that one there is a universal image. And the other one is with the paper boy, and on the image it says "All power to the people" on the paper. Well, that symbolized what we were about: all power to the people, and all power to Black people, all power to poor people, all power to Asian people, all power to yellow people, all power to brown people, all power to the people. That's was our slogan, and was what we practiced as well. And so the images that you, in your images, you want to, it was about community around those images as well. So I thought it had a great significance, and I was delighted that you asked me to contribute to it.
Thank you. So how important do you think intergenerational art collaborations are, between the work or collaborations between younger artists and older artists? How important do you think that is?
Well, it's important that it's a continuation. It's an integration of the historical past, more relevant, maybe recent or historical past, to the moment, 2 generations sharing and showing that it's an ongoing struggle, a continuation of things that we do through our arts, the aesthetics, the beauty, the social justice, the provocative, all those kinds of artwork that's done that has some social meaning and community meaning to it. Just didn't start today. It's a continuation. Even before me, there were others before and before then. Ever since we were brought here against our will to this country. And there has been artwork and creative art that people express their feelings about social concerns in some way and fashion. So in that way, you're not trapped into believing that it started now, but it's a continuation in the spirit of how you interpret it now. and in the language how you interpret it at this time can be very impactful in relationship to how the community can relate to it and see it, and how you engage with everyone at this particular time. So I think it's sharing the rich history with those who may not be aware or may be aware and want to formulate and to maybe contribute it in some kind of way, integrate it some kind of way, the past and the present into the artworks, which I see in many of your quilts with the images of the different folks, personalities, I say, grassroots community personalities in artwork around the quilts themselves. So that kind of is like something that brings about a conversation, discussion, and maybe enlighten and inform those who are uninformed. The artwork was a reflection of the 10-point platform and program of the Black Panther Party, because it was a power to determine the destiny of our poor and oppressed communities, and that was about quality of life issues, education. It was about employment. It was about the Blacks being exempt from military service, about police brutality, being tried by a jury of our peers. All those things were a part of that 10-point platform and program. Education that teaches our role in this present day society. All those things. So that was the 10-point platform of the platform and program of the Black Panther Party. It was always interconnected in the spirit of how it was communicated and articulated. It was the artwork was a reflection of that in some way. It could have been in a provocative way, which was meant to be, or it could have been in a very aesthetic way and beautiful way, but it's always informative and enlightening.